Well, actually, my mother said that I was actually singing before I was talking, and there never was a time that it just came upon me. I was always musically directed and inclined from a kid. Um, it just made the most sense to me always, and I always knew what I wanted to do. I was always um, very focused on playing music and singing and playing drums and studying the craft. It was always my greatest interest.
And when did you first realise that you had like a remarkable vocal ability? Was that like much later on, or did you know early on, like, I'm actually...
Well, I'm still realizing that, I think.
That's very much to me.
The instrument is something that is evolving, and it's a exploration. You're always discovering things about the instrument. At least I like to look at it that way. I grew up mimicking female vocalists because for no reason other than I just liked the way Sarah Vaughan and Mahalia Jackson, Morgana King, Dinah Washington, Nancy Wilson. Dionne Warwick, I just love those songs. So I would, grew up just singing them. But I actually studied operatic baritone in
Oh, right.
in college because as you can hear, morning voice.
Yeah.
I'm a natural baritone, and the falsetto gives me about good days, something like a 4-octave range from my baritone to first soprano.
Yeah, I mean, it's you're very famous for the soaring high vocals, but obviously, you as you just said, you can kind of tackle that whole different side to singing.
Well, Maurice and I both had that gift with the baritone and the falsetto, and that's how we developed the Earth, Wind and Fire sound. Me and him doing all the vocals, multing or doubling the vocals, and we would both sing up and we'd both sing down. But for purposes of identification, Maurice sang most of the baritone signature songs, and I would pinch hit, and then I would sing the falsetto stuff. But
Yeah.
there's several songs on our catalog where I'm singing in my baritone, and
And do you prefer singing like one more than the other, or do you just...
not really. It's just a form of expression. You need to express yourself in tender ways as well as aggressive ways. So it's just part of the expression of the voice.
And do you have to do anything to take care of your voice at the moment?
Yeah, I've been real blessed. I haven't had any issues with my voice, but you've learned over the years, what I can and what I cannot do in terms of, keeping it in shape.
So, one thing that I think personally is that Earth, Wind and Fire, obviously you guys are a very celebrated band, like globally, and you've sold huge quantities of records, and people everywhere listen to your stuff. But I would say that you're quite underrated as well as that. And particularly if people, rather than just knowing like September or Boogie Wonderland, actually knew a bit about what it took to develop that unique sound. How did you first come to meet Maurice White? And I just love to hear a bit more about how that band started.
Well, we had a band in Denver that myself and Larry Dunn and Andrew Woolfolk were in, and Earth, Wind and Fire, the first band that was signed to Warner Brothers, came to Denver, and through a mutual friend and who was then a promotion man at Warner Brothers, Perry Jones, he put us on as opening act for that, and that's how we actually met. I actually met Maurice on the elevator, and I always joke about this. He smelled like coconut oil, you know, because that was the thing for, you know, like the hipsters back
Yeah.
then, you know, and they're coming from Chicago and the big city, and so that was the first memory. But yeah, we opened the show. They got a chance to actually see us. Later on, I had the opportunity to move to Los Angeles, and when they began to reform, they asked me to be in a band, and I enlisted several of my bandmates from Denver, Larry Dunn and Andrew Woolfolk.
And what stage of Earth, Wind and Fire was that? Had there been one record?
Well, there had been actually 2 records on Warner Brothers with guys that were Maurice's age.
Yeah.
And Bob Cavallo actually, when they started to really notice that wasn't going to actually be the workout, Bob Cavallo talked to Maurice and said, you know, you need to get yourself, and we found this out afterwards, you need to find yourself some young guys, you know, more Verdine's age, because Verdine was in the band, in both bands.
Yeah.
And
because how old was Maurice at this stage? Like
he was 10 years older than
10
us.
years older
Yes,
than you
and
guys.
we were 21 when we started with Earth,
Yeah.
Wind and Fire. Me and Verdine and Ralph
And at this stage, like the sound was not.
No, we hadn't developed the signature sound yet. The signature sound that everyone knows was developed in this group. You know, the 9 iconic members.
Yeah.
That's how the signature sound was
And
developed
over
from
years.
that over the years. But relatively pretty quickly, because you know, 2 records in, we were in our stride, and the sound had been really solidified.
And do you know, because I've read quite a lot about the band's history, and it seems like a lot of graft was put into it. Do you recall like really having to work very hard, like
We
on the road
worked.
and-
We worked tirelessly.
Yeah.
One thing about Maurice is he had a fierce work ethic, and because we were that age, we didn't know any better than to just follow his lead. So we learned early on, you know, we didn't have very many days off, you know.
Yeah.
And that means holidays and stuff included. You know, we're always working. I remember, you know, we could be on tour, and you might set up someplace and have a rehearsal, you know.
Even if you had like shows later.
Even
or
if we
whatever.
had shows that night, you know, or
Wow.
after, you know, because it was just that serious that we're very determined
Yeah.
and focused on accomplishing a mission to have the best band that we could have.
And so we talk about the signature Earth, Wind and Fire sound, and I think there's a fair amount of misconception among casual fans that Earth, Wind and Fire, and I know that this is certainly something that Maurice White would hate or would have hated to hear, Earth, Wind and Fire are like a disco band. You know, that's not the case. Obviously, how would you describe the sound?
I think
mean,
we
it blends
describe
bits
it
of
as
everything.
a collection. It's kind of like a fusion band.
Yeah.
A fusion band made commercial. You know, it's a fusion band made commercial because, you know, all those different elements of different genres that represent the band, from, you know, Latin, classical, pop, gospel, rock, you know, R&B, you know. I mean, we even have, you know, songs in there that, you know, where we do more of an acoustic sound, you know, with write a song for you,
Yeah.
you know. And so, it represents a wide spectrum of our musical taste. I grew up listening to middle of the road music, from Denver, listening to, country, pop, So when I got in the band, I recommended us doing that song, Make It With You, that Bread song,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know. And, so we've always just been,
Eclectic.
yeah, very eclectic.
And obviously there have been those kind of like up tempo.
There are those signature hits that someone would gravitate to, and if that's all then
But that's just the tip of the iceberg.
but that's
really, isn't it?
right. It's just one element.
And of all the kind of classic era albums, aside from those hits, and aside from sort of like other things like different to Let's Groove and all that type of stuff, like Love's Holiday, aside from that, what's a kind of like, what are a few deep cuts that like a big fan or somebody who thinks they're a big fan of Earth, Wind and Fire should listen to? Like,
Well,
your personal favourites.
I would go back and listen to early Earth, Wind and Fire, but I also thought that the Faces album was a good representation of Earth, Wind and Fire, still very much in their stride. I think that the record came along and we was probably more music on it that, that needed to be or whatever, but I thought that just artistically that that we were very much in the stride of the original guys.
Yeah. And so in terms of producers that you worked with, how did it compare, sort of like having, because Charles Stepney was like a
Absolutely.
big part of you guys creating your sound, and then for what's a lot of people's favourite Earth, Wind and Fire song, After Love Is Gone, then you started working with David Foster, who's somewhat of a controversial figure among some parts of the music industry, it seems. So like, how did you guys find working with a producer like that, having had such a brilliant relationship with Charles Stepney?
Well, it was totally different working with Charles Stepney. Charles Stepney was more of a co-partner with Maurice, and he was really a mentor for us as a musician, songwriter, arranger. So he really taught us a lot. We were under his tutelage, really, in many respects. And Maurice very much respected Charles and listened to Charles, on a different level than we did, of course. With David Foster, it was, respect pretty much amongst equals. He and Maurice, I thought that was probably the last of the great bodies of music that we did, because Maurice very much it just clicked. It really worked. The chemistry worked. David is very, very talented, and Maurice could take those ideas and make them very commercial and catchy.
Yeah.
Make hits out of them.
Yeah, because he was, he had all the knowledge of the chords.
Exactly.
David Foster, that were quite
Right.
unusual.
Very, very accomplished theorist, music theory, music arranger, pianist, and songwriter.
Yeah, and I guess he went on to prove it, but this was very early. He was very young. Was he younger than you guys?
Very young. He was very young. Yeah. We always, he always tells us stories about him, standing in line to get, the records when they came out and all that stuff. And he was very nervous when he came to the studio and played that, the After Love Is Gone for us, But Maurice recognized right on. David, tells only he can tell it better. what influence Maurice had on him as a producer.
Yeah, I think I've seen a clip on YouTube of you guys
Yeah,
playing his
he's very
Stone and stuff on his.
He's very out front about exactly how Maurice that influenced him and how he was able to really change and direct him.
And the deep cuts on that record, like Weight or Star or things like that, are just just as good as the hits, really.
Yeah, we were in that enviable position, like a ball team, winning a pennant or whatever, where everything aligns together at the right time. The musician and all the people on on the inner circle, the record company, and the public that we were playing for. So it was, it was a sweet period.
Yeah, and when you've got such a long career, I guess it can be quite irritating to constantly have these nostalgia trips. So I want to fast forward to today, and you've got a new record out.
I have a new record that I worked on for about 2 years. Because I'm really blessed to have my musical skills still at a very high level. I wanted to do a record with A-listers. I had a relationship with Christian McBride and Chick Corea, so we started there with the collaboration and recorded, and then we moved on with Robert Glasper and Kamasi Washington, Christian Scott. It's a project I'm very proud of. It debuted #1 on the jazz charts, and I've been out doing some solo dates with some great musicians from the East Coast.
Awesome.
So I call that my night gig, and EWF my day gig.
Your day gig.
Yeah.
Well, those are two good gigs to have.
Two gigs to have, two great gigs.
And of all the, of all the guys in Earth, Wind and Fire, you've had the most successful solo career. How does that make you feel?
Well, I've always wanted to make sure that I could explore every opportunity to be creative and to evolve as an artist. I've won Grammys for my gospel records. I've had #1 hits with the Phil Collins Easy Lover on a Chinese Wall record that I did. So I've done
The Chinese Wall was a huge album in general.
Internationally, yeah. So I've done 10 solo projects, and Level Finding Way is the 10th on Verve. But yeah, it gives me an opportunity to just really branch out, spread my wings, and not be in the confounds of just what's expected with Earth, Wind and Fire, because people have a preconceived idea of what it should sound like or whatever.
And I guess you've got to make sure that you're getting on well, like a band is a band.
It's never really ever been a problem. Because I'm able to grow in that area and then come back and have more to give, to the home front.
And when you collaborated with Phil Collins, were you a fan of his work already?
I was, and the Phoenix Horns actually were working with him on his record, and they introduced us, and that was a really fun time in my life and career, spending that much time in England, and I was, I had my routine, getting on the tube and going to my tennis lessons and going to the gym and the whole thing. I had my little community over there, so that was great.
Yeah, and that record really, has held up. It's one of his biggest hits.
It definitely did. He still performs that on his tours, and it's on his greatest hits.
And did he make it clear to you, because it's obvious if you're a big Earth, Wind and Fire fan and you're a big Phil Collins fan, did he make it clear to you how much of an influence you were on his sound?
Oh, most definitely. Well, he sought us out.
He sought out those guys.
He sought out, the Earth, Wind and Fire horns, because he was a fan. There was a time actually where there was a little uh, little quiet conversation about him perhaps producing some things on Earth, Wind and Fire. That could have been.
That would have been amazing. Would that have been in the 80s or something?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because he produced like a few things for like other artists in the 80s. That would have been.
I thought that could have been very
awesome.
very interesting. Yeah.
Well, it's not too late.
Not too late. Not too late.
But my final question to you, Phil, is what are the songs in your career that you're the most proud of? Because there will be people watching this who aren't as knowledgeable as me and won't have actually heard that many of them, and they probably should, I think.
Oh well, wow.
Difficult question.
I'm always in the present, but I think that that's the way of the world record. Is some of our, and I Am and All in All are some of our greatest works. I mean, obviously, my Triumph album that won a Grammy, and the Chinese Wall,
And from the new record.
yeah, and
what
from
are
the
your
new
favourite
record,
songs?
I think that we did covers of Curtis Mayfield on there, and Annie Lennox. I mean, not Annie Lennox, Abby Lincoln. But yeah, and we did some instrumentals on there. But it's a collection of music that we intentionally really carved from start to finish with a theme in mind.
Well, I'm looking forward to listening to it again. Thanks very much.
Thank you, enjoyed it. Thanks for the interview.